Last week, Germany's draft military service bill, due to come into force in early 2026, experienced a major setback after a row erupted in the governing coalition over a proposed lottery system. This was a proposal to call up young men for compulsory military service if the voluntary scheme fails to recruit enough people, and was added to the bill just days before it was due to go to Parliament, as a compromise between the two governing coalition parties, the centre-right Christian Democratic Union, or CDU, and the centre-left Social Democratic Party, or SPD. However, the SPD Defence Minister Boris Pistorius reportedly objected to the lottery provision at the last minute, over concerns that it would be seen as unfair, forcing the cancellation of a press conference and taking the bill back to a purely voluntary scheme. So in this video, we'll explain Germany's rearmament crisis, why it's not going to plan, and what might happen next. Never miss an episode, and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. Let's start by explaining the current state of the German army, the Bundeswehr. In their coalition agreement, published in April, Germany's centre-right CDU and centre-left SPD parties pledged to create a new attractive military service, initially based on voluntary participation, aiming to introduce flexible service and career models, as well as increasing the proportion of women and people with immigrant backgrounds in the army. This came largely in response to anxieties around the state of Europe's defence readiness since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the fact that the German army has shrunk significantly since the end of the Cold War, from nearly 500,000 troops in the 1990s to just 181,174 today. As such, Germany aims to expand its armed forces to 260,000 by 2035, and more than double its number of reservists to 200,000. So, in May, in his first speech as Chancellor, Friedrich Merz set out his ambitions for Germany's rearmament, having already passed a constitutional amendment to exclude all military spending from Germany's constitutional spending limit, the debt brake, as well as creating a €500 billion special fund to invest in German infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and railways that will be needed to transfer tanks and troops to the Eastern Front if a war broke out with Russia. Merz also pledged to provide, quote, all the financial resources the Bundeswehr needs to become Europe's strongest conventional army. Then in August, the German cabinet passed its draft military service bill, the Defence Service Modernisation Act, which, as well as introducing voluntary military service, opened the door to compulsory enlistment if the voluntary scheme falls short of the required numbers. For context, like many European countries, Germany began phasing out conscription in the early 2000s and ended mandatory conscription in 2011. Originally, the proposed volunteer scheme involved sending out a questionnaire to 18-year-olds, which would be mandatory for men and optional for women, a cohort of whom would then be selected for at least 6 months of military training. However, several members of Merz's government were concerned the volunteer scheme didn't go far enough and would struggle to plug the Bundeswehr's personnel shortages. So they began pushing for another provision to be added to the bill, considering a return to conscription if the voluntary model fails. To this end, according to media reports, the CDU and SPD coalition parties had recently struck a compromise, agreeing to add a lottery provision to call up young men for compulsory military service if not enough volunteers signed up. However, last week the bill was thrown into disarray after SPD Defence Minister Pistorius objected to the lottery provision, fearing that it would waste time and be seen as unfair by the public. While the lottery system isn't new in Europe, Denmark introduced a new lottery system in July that applies to both women and men, Pistorius was also reportedly frustrated with the decision to get rid of the mandatory military service questionnaire for all men turning 18, arguing that it would prevent the Bundeswehr from knowing who was available to serve in a crisis. Pistorius has also backed proposals for all eligible young men to undergo a medical from July 2027, so Germany has a clear picture of availability. This speaks to a wider political disagreement between the two parties in Merz's governing coalition over how to reach the ambitious figure of 260,000 Bundeswehr troops that the government is aiming for. While the centre-left SPD generally favours a purely voluntary model, several senior CDU figures, as well as the SPD's Pistorius, have been pushing for a legal pathway towards compulsory service. But some SPD members were reportedly concerned about whether the random lottery proposal was even constitutional. In its current form, the bill now being debated in Parliament doesn't contain the lottery element, although the CDU reportedly still stands by it. Now, this makes it more likely to pass, although the Greens and left-wing Die Linke parties have criticised the bill's lack of transparency, with Die Linke arguing that it carries the appearance of voluntarism when it is actually paving the way for a return to conscription. But even if the bill passes, perhaps the deeper problem for Germany's rearmament drive is that young Germans just aren't that interested in military service, let alone conscription. An October 2025 Forza study for the Stern newspaper found that while a majority, 54%, of Germans support compulsory military service and 41% oppose it, among 18 to 29-year-olds who would be directly targeted by the scheme, this opposition rises to 63%. This partly explains why the average age of a German soldier is now 34 and creeping upwards. Young people in tech-critical occupations like IT, engineering, and aviation also tend to look for better-paying private sector jobs rather than joining the army. Similarly, the experience of serving in the military often doesn't match with the expectations of younger recruits, leading to a high turnover and a struggle to retain members. In 2023, over 25% of new recruits quit during the initial 6-month trial period, and while 2024 saw a record number of applications, up 18% from the previous year, nearly 3,000 soldiers still left the force, a steep jump from the 200 who left in 2021. This is why in the past few years the government has introduced a number of reforms aimed at making it easier for volunteers to become professional fixed-term soldiers, increasing pension benefits, including for reservists, and increasing pay for military service, plus free accommodation, rail travel, and medical care. Ultimately, there's also a looming question around whether this is even a good strategy for Germany at all. Some experts have suggested that Germany might be better off contributing to a European continental army than trying to rebuild a large national force on its own. In fact, according to a recent survey by Le Grand Continent, 69% of Germans support a European army over national defence. And while a European army would face significant political, legal, and operational hurdles, it could arguably be cheaper in terms of procurement, more integrated, and more efficient than separate national military build-ups. Before you go, we've just announced our new coffee table book, Assembly Required, a 300-page book which highlights 27 of the world's most beautiful parliament buildings, from the classics like the British Parliament in Westminster, to the US Capitol or the Hungarian Parliament, to ones you might not expect, like New Zealand, Bhutan, or Bangladesh. For each parliament, we don't just show beautiful photos of these actually incredible buildings, we also tell you the stories behind the buildings, both through passages written by our team, as well as through detailed custom-designed floor plans and diagrams. We really did spend a long time on this too. We spent ages digging into the stories of parliament buildings all around the world, before narrowing it down to just the most interesting and beautiful buildings, writing tens of thousands of words to tell you their stories. We've also made both desk and wall calendars based on Assembly Required too, allowing you to experience these beautiful buildings year-round. Both are also double-sided, providing tons of bonus images for you to enjoy. If you're interested, you can click the link in the description to find out more. Plus, there's a whole load of bundles available if you want a good deal. Plus, if you do want a copy, then you can get 15% off anything Assembly Required by using the code ASSEMBLY. That code only lasts for this week, so if you're interested, now's your time. Anyway, this is just another way that you can help fund our journalism. So if you are interested, then your support will help us to continue investing in our journalism, as well as providing free content for years to come. So as always, thank you very much.